ensemble. Bonjour. Come. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Merci tout le monde d'être ici. I want to start by acknowledging that we're on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin peoples, and to them we say Miigwech. Je suis ici aujourd'hui avec quelques candidats de cette région d'Ottawa et aussi de Gatineau. I would first like to introduce the candidates who are here with me, starting with Michelle Peterson from Orleans, José Poirier-Dufoy de Hull-Aylmer, and here we're in the riding where the next member of Parliament for Ottawa Centre, I'm with Angela Keller-Herzog. The topic of our focus today is international affairs. Of course, as I was pointing out last night in the debate, we're the only party with a fully costed platform. The release of the platform was almost at the point of the writ drop. Our budget has been reviewed by former Parliamentary Budget Officer Kevin Page. It's detailed, it's transparent, and where there are uncertainties, we identify them. So I'm very proud of the work we've done. And there's a substantial section on international affairs. I did want to note that now that all the debates are over, and speaking of platforms, apparently Mr. Scheer has decided that it's okay for Canadians to see the Conservative platform after all the debates are over. I was astonished last night that he wanted to press Mr. Trudeau on details around platform and budget, since his wasn't anywhere to be seen, but you know, this is a strange election. The other point I wanted to make was that we haven't had a significant focus on international affairs. That's why we're talking about international affairs today and the link with climate change. But I specifically wanted to say what a shame it was that Mr. Trudeau declined the invitation for a specific debate on international affairs. This does concern Canadians. I did a 35-town and city cross-country tour in 2019 called the Community Matters Tour. And if journalists and others think Canadians aren't interested in international affairs, I can tell you we had a lot of questions about Canada's relationship with Saudi Arabia. We had a lot of questions about what's happening in our relationship with the People's Republic of China, and of course a lot of questions about Mr. Trump. So we clearly have a population in Canada that thinks of ourselves as internationalists. We truly are engaged in the world. The world comes to us. We're multicultural. We have a lot of concerns about international affairs. But I think it was particularly troubling that in the last couple of days, there's been almost no commentary in the course of our election about how dangerous a single tweet from Donald Trump can be. People are dying right now in northern Syria because yet another U.S. president has decided to abandon the Kurds. This is unbearable, really. We asked for the Kurds to step up. We asked for the Kurds. They were practically the only ally helping fight ISIS in the territory of Syria. And now they are abandoned to bombardment from the Turkish government into northern Syria. C'est maintenant un vrai désastre humanitaire parce que dans la Syrie, la République de la Turquie a fait maintenant les bombardements à cause de la décision de M. Trump, le président des États-Unis, de dire clairement qu'il n'a pas intérêt de protéger la population kurde. C'est affreux. So our focus today in the press release, as you can see, is on the many ways in which the climate crisis is a crisis in international affairs. It means, for instance, Arab Spring and the instability in the region was prompted by, according to many policy experts, a prolonged drought. In other words, a climate event creates geopolitical uncertainty and instability. We need to rethink our posture in the world, our military posture, our diplomatic posture, in the context of climate crisis. This is where Canadian leadership is needed more than ever. I also want to touch on one aspect of foreign affairs that has come up in the debates, and that's Mr. Scheer's horrific notion that we should cut overseas development assistance in Canada by a quarter. Just want to draw attention to, in our budget, and so this has been released for some time, we're making the commitment again, to the Pearson target, 0.7% of our GDP into overseas development assistance, so that we reach that target by 2030. So it's going to take some time. Now, to give everyone a sense of where we are, the 0.7% target was chosen once Lester B. Pearson was no longer our prime minister. He was doing a UN commission for what the right level of overseas development assistance was from the wealthier countries. And he picked 0.7%. Most of the donor countries in the world have already hit that target. Some have hit 1%. Canada's best ever attempt to hit 0.7 was in 1992 under Brian Mulroney when it got up to 0.45. It's been a scandalous abdication of responsibility as a wealthy nation. Canadians think, which is how Mr. Scheer is getting away with this, by the way, Canadians think that we're generous internationally. They think that our overseas development assistance is outsized because the people of Canada have a big heart and are generous. They think that means our budget is generous towards the poorest of the poor. It's not. And a decision to cut by 1/4 global assistance is actually so wrong-headed. It's not just about generosity, although it should be. It's also about self-interest. The world is more secure. People are safer. Canadians are safer when people have a roof over their head and enough to eat and clean drinking water, and if women and girls get an education. Those are critical goals for global stability. That's why the Green Party platform is based around, and I hope I can find the right page to say this, our entire platform is coded to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, including making poverty history in Canada and internationally. A decision that it doesn't matter to cut overseas development assistance by 25% and not having a response from the other parties. Where are you, Mr. Trudeau, on 0.7%, making poverty history? Where are you, Mr. Singh? We want to know that we have clear commitments. We know where Mr. Scheer is on almost every issue that I can see, moving rapidly in the wrong direction. So if you're interested in rapid movement and you don't care if it's forward or backward, then Scheer may be your guy. But we'd like to move forward, as you say, together. We have an expert with us in our number here, so I want to turn over the podium to our local candidate, Angela Keller-Herzog, who had 20 years experience working at the Canadian International Development Agency. Je vais dire un peu résumé en français. Je suis absolument étonnée par l'engagement de M. Scheer de couper notre aide vers les pays plus pauvres par 25%. C'est une idée affreuse et contre les intérêts du Canada parce que le pays du monde, le développement durable, l'élimination de la pauvreté, c'est dans l'intérêt du Canada parce que nous sommes un pays dans un monde et on doit mettre sur pied les systèmes pour l'élimination de la pauvreté, pour l'éducation des filles et des femmes. Et pour ça, je vais donner la parole à Angela Keller-Herzog, qui a une carrière de 20 ans avec notre agence de développement, maintenant annulée par M. Harper, mais dans notre plateforme, nous sommes engagés de mettre sur pied encore notre agence de développement international. And so I'll give it to Angela to take the podium for a minute or two. Or 5?
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this press conference. As the climate pressures mount, it is absolutely, the writing is on the wall that there will be more poverty and more pressure to migrate. It is far more cost-effective for us to give support to vulnerable populations in the face of sea level rise, pressures on subsistence agriculture, in very poor countries, just to give some examples. It's far more cost-effective to give support in those countries rather than to wait for refugees and migration to overwhelm the borders of the industrialized countries. Therefore, it stands to reason that Canada should have an independent aid program where the development assistance is not subsumed by objectives of commerce or military objectives, for that matter. One of the legacies of the Harper government that we're still living with is that the Canadian International Development Assistance Program is subsumed under the global affairs. We believe that a separate ministry should be responsible for an independent, results-oriented Canadian Development Assistance Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. The irony here is thick. First, Mr. Harper eliminates CETA, and we end up having the #1 donor country be Afghanistan, aligned with our military and strategic objectives. And then along comes Mr. Scheer and says, well, you're not helping the poorest of the poor, so we can cut a quarter of your aid. Huh. Exactly as Angela Keller-Herzog just said, the misdirection, if there is any, within our Overseas Development Agency is because we lost the coherence, the policy alignment that said, let's identify the poorest of the poor and help them. So our press release today also speaks to the need to look at our defense posture. We definitely need more support for our diplomacy. Under Stephen Harper, our diplomatic muscle was set to the side to be a diplomatic noodle. And we see what happens with that, right? We see that as a stand closer. We're all so close to each other. We are one big candidate here. So what we want to make clear to Canadians is that we can be the country you think we are. I bet if you ask Canadians what makes you proud about our traditions, peacekeeping is a proud tradition, but we're not living up to it. Assistance around the world. We know the stories that kids who were from the United States used to sew a Canadian flag to their backpack to get a better reception around the world. Why? Because the local school, the local well were built by CETA. The bags of food they received had a Canadian flag on the bag. This is something that makes us proud, but it's no longer the case. Now Canadian kids might sew another flag on their backpack because of the violation of human rights by Canadian mining companies. So we want to be the country that Canadians think we are already, the country that works to keep peace on the ground, the country that invests in children around the world so that they have healthy food, that they have a good education, that their countries are lifted up and that they can stay in their country making it a better place. And as Angela said, the climate crisis contributes to global instability. So that's another platform item I just wanted to underline. Our budget calls for an increase of $1 billion a year. Now that's important. It's not coming from the Overseas Development Assistance budget for poverty. It's directed money for Canada to pay and play our fair share in the fight against climate change in the developing world. C'est une autre chose dans notre budget, c'est d'avoir un additionnel 1 milliard par année pour Canada aider les pays en développement avec le défi de changement climatique, pour les adaptations, pour le changement vers l'énergie renouvelable, toutes les choses qu'on doit faire à cause de l'urgence climatique. Thank you for your patience. We're open for any questions you might have.
When Justin Trudeau was re-elected in 2015, he said that Canada is back. He said that to the international community. Are we back, Ms. May?
No, we're not. I was in the room when he said that. It was the Paris negotiations. God forgive me how trusting I am. I actually cried. Delegates from around the world were coming up to me after Trudeau's speech, running up to me because we've known each other for a long time. Yeah, I've been going to climate negotiations for far too long. While the needle doesn't budge, but we try really hard and we try to get better text, etc. So I had delegates from around the world running up to me and saying, we're so happy, because during the time that Harper was Prime Minister, you kind of felt like a pariah. I thought Canada would be back. I thought we would be contributing our fair share to overseas development assistance. I thought we would pull the Harper target. I thought Trudeau would do it in Paris. I honestly thought he would say this 30% target that the Liberals decried when it was brought out by then Environment Minister Leona Aglukkaq, and Catherine McKenna, the current MP here, you might know that. Catherine McKenna actually said in Paris, the 30% target is weak. It's the floor. We'll do better. Well, it suddenly became the ceiling and they can't reach it. So, no, Canada is not yet back. Canada still plays, I would say, I'll give credit, because I think the image that Justin Trudeau portrays in the world of a champion for neoliberalism, he wants to be seen as a champion for liberalism, for trade, for a society that does do peacekeeping, all those things he projects as image. But we still don't have the muscle. We've got to invest in diplomacy, we've got to rethink what our military does, we've got to put it all through the lens of climate change, which means you can't pretend that you can build a pipeline over here and fight climate change over here and have that make any sense. Whenever Catherine McKenna says in the House of Commons, the environment and the economy go hand in hand, the image that comes to mind is Thelma and Louise at the cliff, because that's the way Trudeau and McKenna deliver the environment and the economy going hand in hand. Pedal to the metal off the edge of the cliff. You can make the economy benefit from climate action, but your economic actions have to align with your climate goals. You can't say they go hand in hand when they are contradictory. And so that's, je veux le moment, j'ai hâte le moment quand il était vrai, il sera vrai que le Canada est maintenant dans le monde, fait notre rôle historique, comme dans l'époque de Lester B. Pearson, comme dans l'époque de Paul Martin. Mais il fait très longtemps que nous n'avons pas fait notre rôle dans le monde, et le monde a besoin du Canada, particulièrement dans les négociations climatiques. Et maintenant, nous manquons un seul leader dans les négociations. À cause de la faiblesse de Mme Merkel maintenant, elle a fait un rôle incroyable depuis les négociations. Monsieur Stéphane Dion, en 2005, a fait un rôle historique dans les négociations. Mais maintenant, malheureusement, nous manquons un leader. Et c'est M. Antonio Guterres comme général secrétaire des Nations Unies, mais il n'est pas un chef d'un pays, il n'est pas un premier ministre ni président. Nous avons besoin du Canada avec un premier ministre courageux pour faire les choses qu'on doit faire. Yes, sir.
Given what Turkey's doing in Syria, do you think the other NATO countries should review Turkey's membership in NATO?
Absolutely. And I think we should review our membership in NATO. So we need to realign our whole question of where are our strategic alliances and are they working? But I think we also have to ask some very tough questions of Mr. Trump, members of his own party. I mean, I didn't think I'd see Lindsey Graham criticizing Trump. People who understand strategic alliances and strategic affairs, especially with the question of whether Mr. Trump's business relationships with Erdogan are in any way influencing, or his relationship with Mr. Putin. What is influencing the United States to abandon the Kurds? ISIS could still restart. They are holding ISIS prisoners in jails throughout northern Syria. What's going on here? I think we really need to ask for, even though it's an election campaign, what would the other leaders say about this? This is a crisis, and it's disturbing at many levels. It's the integrity of global systems of relationships that you can count on, like NATO, Turkey's relationship with NATO, now bombing northern Syria, now imperiling. It's hard to even call it a fragile peace. We still have the butcher Bashar al-Assad in charge in Syria. We abandoned the people of Syria. Why? Because, roll it back, the doctrine of responsibility to protect was substantially contaminated when Canada, with the U.S. and other allies, decided it was more important to murder Muammar Gaddafi in the street than to pursue peace in Libya. So all the armaments in Gaddafi's warehouses ended up flowing to groups that didn't yet exist. I mean, just to go back, just to reaffirm where Green Party will always stand on international affairs, there's a reason that I was the only member of Parliament to vote against bombing Libya, the only one.
Ms. May, sorry about that.
No, I was just going to follow up by asking, if you become Prime Minister, or indeed hold the balance of power, how would you change Canada's position about NATO, and what would you urge Canada to do with regards to the bombing of the Kurds?
Yeah. There's a couple of steps in the answer to that. One is that we really have diminished the capacity of what we now call Global Affairs Canada to exercise effective diplomacy. A lot of this goes back to things that were done in the Harper administration, the idea that any civil servant anywhere across the Canadian government could fill a post internationally as if it was sort of a treat, like a Club Med experience. Our diplomats need to be trained in the languages of the countries in which they serve. They need to have deep historical understanding, particularly when you're dealing with Shiite and Sunni tensions and ancient conflicts. It's a complicated area. You don't send amateurs into a complicated area. Selling off our residences as though those didn't matter. Those are the places where diplomacy got done. So we're going to have to reinvest substantially in our diplomatic service. Our military alliances, we have to look at them and say, what's the next biggest threat to climate change? Well, what's the biggest security threat right now? Climate crisis. What's the second biggest security threat? Unraveling the efforts for nuclear disarmament. Canada needs to step up and sign the treaty to abolish nuclear weapons, and I think the most effective role for us within NATO is to get our NATO allies to agree, and this is a tall order, that it's long since time to abolish nuclear weapons because it's a threat we don't need. So that means talking to NATO allies and saying, well, if we're going to be in an alliance, what's our strategic advantage? Well, it's protection from invading armies. Okay, here's a question. Do we really think we're going to face invading armies? Or do we think we're going to face a cybersecurity threat where suddenly a foreign power turns off all the trains and the sewage systems? So we're in a different world. An invading army is not necessarily, I mean, I'm prepared to be educated by generals, but invading armies for Canada, for which we need NATO protection because we have a common defense shield, is that what we really think our threat is in the 21st century? Because I don't. So we need to actually review where are our security threats. Is our response and where we're putting our money responsive to where we see current security threats? I think we have much more need to protect with search and rescue and also with monitoring what's happening on our Arctic coastline. Because again, a climate change effect is that we're losing Arctic ice. We're seeing a real possibility of strategic loss of regions of the Arctic simply from neglect. And the Inuit peoples have established our best claim for sovereignty, but we haven't supported the Inuit in their efforts to make sure it's really clear that this is Canadian territory and we need to have the infrastructure along our northern coastline.
Ms. May, you're aware of NATO doctrine, and you have a sophisticated understanding of this. You're saying NATO should abandon its nuclear deterrent. It was put in place to counter Russia during the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
Yeah.
Now Russia is more assertive than ever. So how do you square NATO giving up its nuclear deterrent when there's no sign that Russia will?
It's the same thing we've always been through. I mean, I grew up as a Cold War baby, and the notion of mutually assured destruction bothered me then. It bothers me now. Obviously, one doesn't do unilateral nuclear disarmament, but we should sign the treaty to work towards the abolition of nuclear weapons, and we should ensure that a goal of NATO is nuclear disarmament. Right now, it's not a goal of NATO. If NATO enters into negotiations as a group, again with Putin, for we are going to roll back the nuclear armaments we have. I think it's very interesting. I don't know what happened with President Macron's recent offer to Iran, but the Iranian deal negotiated when President Obama was in office was actually working to reduce the threat of nuclear armaments in Iran. It got dumped again by the recklessness of the foreign policy under Donald Trump. We need to see, where does NATO fit? Are we playing a constructive role in achieving world peace, in reducing the nuclear threat, or are we acting as if we're still in the Cold War and we're ready to go backwards, sort of to Dr. Strangelove times of nuclear deterrent, which involves the constant threat of the famous nuclear clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. We really don't want to hit midnight.
Can you clarify what you said earlier about Canada in NATO? I mean, do you think we should be in or out? Or should Turkey be in or out? Can you just make that
Crystal clear? I think NATO should review Turkey's membership in NATO, and I think Canada should review Canada's membership in NATO to see if it meets our strategic needs in the 21st century.
How does it not meet our needs, given that we're a small country and we've traditionally, since the end of the Second World War, aligned ourselves in alliances such as NATO and a whole other bunch of architecture that we all know about?
The question in the 21st century is, where are the security threats? Our number one security threat is the climate crisis. Another security threat is the growing movement towards reversing, I'll put it that way, we're reversing the progress that was made under Gorbachev and Reagan, with Putin and Trump saying, well, we don't care about these agreements to move towards nuclear disarmament. I think our relationships need to be examined in light of 21st century security threats, not 19th century security threats.
Donald Trump has questioned the relevance of NATO, so I guess you're aligning yourself with him on that point?
No. I think Mr. Trump is pursuing a protectionist, isolationist, xenophobic agenda. Greens would never align with that. Greens are the only truly global party, right? There are Green parties in 80 countries around the world. I have colleagues with whom I can consult at any time all around the world. I'm the co-chair of the Global Greens Parliamentarians Association. Believe it or not, there are 400 elected Greens at the federal level around the world, and we consult. And we go to international meetings and we consult. But one of our core tenets as Greens is that we work to a more secure world through promoting nonviolence, through promoting peace, so that when there's a trouble spot in the world and the shooting stops, that's when you have to put in more effort to secure that peace through international development assistance, through support for their civil society. So where we differ entirely, I can't imagine a single issue on which we would agree with Mr. Trump, is that we need to work together globally towards a secure peace. And that, again, goes back to why we need international development assistance, why we need to abolish nuclear weapons. These are things that work together. And Mr. Trump's agenda is mercantile, bizarre, and entirely reckless.
Would you support Canadian troops being sent in to help the Kurds in that conflict?
The principles of peacekeeping are for the country to which we're sending troops to ask for our assistance. I don't think Bashar al-Assad is going to ask for our assistance. I don't think Turkey is going to ask for our assistance. We've created a bloodbath, and we were part of that because we went along with the ideas of helping protect Bashar al-Assad and keep him in power. We never stepped up to protect the people of Syria when he first started killing his own people. We didn't step up because, as I mentioned, we couldn't get it through the United Nations Security Council anymore because we had a UN Security Council resolution to allow us to go into Libya, and we collectively, and Canada included, undermined one of the most important emerging doctrines to be able to go in and protect the Kurds now. We need to be able to say to the UN Security Council, we have to do this because of the responsibility to protect. That doctrine, because of our betrayal, we said globally, we're going into Libya to protect the people of Libya and secure them against Gaddafi, right? And then we said, well, when there was a peace deal on the table, just to refresh people's memory, because it was 2011, there was a peace deal available on the table, and Gaddafi said he would negotiate, and this group of so-called rebel forces were suddenly acknowledged by Canada and the world as the legitimate government of Libya. It included former fighters from Al-Qaeda. I remember saying to John Baird, who was then our minister, in the House, how can you acknowledge this ragtag group that includes some terrorists from Al-Qaeda as the legitimate government of Libya? And he said, well, we may not know what will follow in Libya as the government, but we can be sure of one thing. It can't be as bad as Gaddafi. Oh yeah? We helped start ISIS because those warehouses full of weapons went absolutely directly to insurgents in Mali. It went to Boko Haram. It went to the people who started ISIS. Millions and millions of dollars worth of weapons of all kinds was unleashed to the terrorist world. We could have done something to stop that from happening, but John Baird said we may not know what will follow Gaddafi, but we know one thing, it can't be as bad as Gaddafi. Well, now we have a failed state in Libya. We've destroyed the opportunity to use the doctrine to protect, to go in and help people in other countries, and we helped start ISIS. I hate rolling back the tape. It was only 8 years ago, but we have very short memories. We need to rebuild our diplomatic service. We need to rethink our military alliances, and we need to find some ways to help the Kurdish forces. And I honestly, standing here before you, don't know what we can do that's meaningful without making things worse. But it's an absolute crisis, and perhaps just telling the Turkish government that their membership in NATO is under review because of bombing northern Syria, we might get them to stand back for a moment. Any trade pressure, any diplomatic pressure, any conversations to convince the government of Turkey to stop this right now and find peace. But of course, we've always known, sorry to rattle on and on, but we've always known that Turkey's biggest fear would be the establishment of a Kurdish state, because it crosses the borders between Syria and Turkey. And so they're willing to accept, we seem to always be willing to accept the help of the Kurdish people fighting to protect us when we need them. And then we abandon them. Bush did it in the early 90s. It's been done, but even well before that, we know the Kurdish population is willing to step up and help the world, and when the world needs them, we walk away.
You know, the Green Party is dedicated to pacifism. Does that mean that the role of Canada's military would change under a Green government?
We're dedicated, it's one of our core green values, you're right, is we have 6 core green values: social justice and grassroots democracy and ecological wisdom and so on. One of them is a commitment to nonviolence and peace. It doesn't mean you don't have a military. It doesn't mean that your military can't get involved in a shooting war, but you should be always dedicated to finding ways to build a durable peace, invest in a durable peace, convince other allies to invest in a durable peace. It means, and I think, just reference just a personal anecdote, as Mr. Blanchet ought to do last night. But one of my friends on Vancouver Island is a hero. His name is Colonel Trevor Green. You may remember, because he was the soldier, you'll remember the story, in Afghanistan, who took off his helmet to sit in a circle with the village elders to show respect, and then someone who was not associated with that circle of elders attacked him from the back with an axe to the back of his head. And he has miraculously survived. But when he lives in Nanaimo, and he's a very active Green Party member. Anyway, Trevor always says that when he joined Canada's forces, he wanted to be a peacekeeper. He wanted to wear the blue beret. He believes, as do many other very brave Canadians who have served in our armed forces, that they can play a role in the world as peacekeepers. That became unpopular during the Harper years, but Trevor always says that, you know, investing in peace doesn't mean that you never get engaged in a war, but your engagement is towards peacekeeping, and that it's a very robust, it isn't somehow a weakling activity. Peace operations are tough work, and they take long-term investment and long-term commitment and building relationships, just the way Trevor did when he took off his helmet.
And quickly, is there a target for the number of peacekeepers that you would commit Canada to?
Well, right now we rank 59th in the world. So let's just do closer to where our allies are. Right now, 59th in the world isn't good enough. Peacekeeping operations typically need, from Canada, some generals, some people who know how to organize, because the fighting forces sign up, as many will know, because they're paid a certain amount of a certain number of dollars a day.
Well, what's the number?
Well, I'd like to think of it in terms of ranking and operability. I think it's certainly, we don't want to rank 59th in the world. Let's shoot for 10th. How would that be? Thank you very much for everybody's attention. Merci tout le monde aujourd'hui. Et nous restons ici disponibles tous les candidates. We're all available if you want to ask any questions. Vote green. Thanks. Oh, we're joined. Laurier.
Oh, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen. Our former Prime Minister. It's amazing how well you look, sir, having been dead so very long.
Well, these things happen. I just have one thing to say. I was a member of the House for
Oh, yeah.
I was a member of the House for 45 years as a Liberal. I was the Prime Minister of this great country, Canada, for 16 years. And I was a Liberal for 152 years. But I've just become so disappointed in my own party. They seem to now be run by political elites, corporate elites, and lobbyists seem to define policy, especially around climate, building pipelines, buying pipelines, LNG, the critical issues of our time. So I'm going green.
Thank you.